Good evening all and welcome. Thank you all so much for joining me on this thrilling Ghost Week. I've certainly had a lot of fun recording it for all of you and I hope you have enjoyed listening. And to top it all off, 7 disturbing true paranormal stories for you to enjoy. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I just want to start by saying I am normally a huge skeptic about anything paranormal. However, this experience feels way too weird to just be a coincidence. The other weekend I went on a ski trip with my friend. We left around 6, and it was about a 4-hour drive to the cabin we were staying at. The first few hours were completely normal. We were just driving and making jokes and listening to music. Around hour 3 it got weird. At this point it was pitch black, and we were driving on a windy mountain road. Every turn looked exactly the same, and the moon was very dim, so the only light came from our headlights. The roads were basically empty. The music we were streaming cut out due to lack of service, and an uncomfortable silence fell between us. We both felt really strange, as if we were in imminent danger. My friend said he felt weird, or as if something bad was about to happen to him. Other than this, we hadn't said anything for nearly an hour, when out of nowhere he said, "Imagine in 5 or 10 years, we're going to know people we went to school with who have died of a drug overdose or car accident or something crazy. It's crazy how that can happen to anybody." We spoke about this for a while, and slowly everything went back to normal, and nothing strange happened for the rest of the night. The next morning we woke up, and my friend found an email from his high school saying that 6 kids from his school had been in a car accident. 4 of them died on impact, 2 still in critical condition. He was desk mates with one of the girls and knew her pretty well. The crash occurred around the same time we got the strange feeling. We never usually talk about death or anything morbid, so it seemed really strange that the night of such a horrific accident, we spoke about people we went to school with dying. The feeling we both got was unlike anything we had ever experienced. I am not a good enough writer to put it into words, but it almost felt like the ripple of their departure from this life could be felt as far away as we were. I'm 26 now, and for as long as I can remember, I've been plagued by things that defy explanation. Paranormal disturbances that started subtly when I was still living under my parents' roof in our old family home. One ordinary evening stands out vividly while I was brushing my teeth in the upstairs bathroom. The mirror fogged slightly from the running water, and the room otherwise was silent, with all the windows firmly shut against the evening chill, and no one else in the house anywhere near me, when suddenly the toothpaste tube, sitting innocently on the counter several feet away, nowhere within my reach or even within the path of a draft, began rocking back and forth on its own, in a slow motion that lasted only a few unsettling seconds, but left me frozen in place, staring at it in disbelief as it finally stilled without any visible cause or force to account for its movement. Not long after that, another incident jolted me awake in the dead of night from the rocking chair positioned right next to my bed, which had always been completely stationary before, but now swayed rhythmically on its own for several long seconds, as if an invisible weight was shifting in it. The wood groaned softly under pressure that I couldn't see, until I gathered my voice and asked kindly yet firmly for it to stop, at which point the motion ceased abruptly, like it had been listening and complying with my plea. Even more unnerving were the nights when I'd lie there trying to sleep, only to hear the unmistakable metal clink and shuffling of money tins I kept stashed directly under my bed, right near my pillow. Items that were heavy and secure, with nothing else metal in that spot to mimic the sound. Yet they'd rattle around as if being prodded, or slid across the floorboards by hands I couldn't see, sending vibrations up through the mattress that made rest impossible, until the noises finally faded into silence. About a year ago, After I'd already moved out to live with my partner in our shared apartment, the disturbances evolved into something far more evasive and personal, beginning with voices that cut through the air, as if someone were right beside me. One evening, my partner had warned me the day before that he'd be late coming home from a long job site shift, so I expected the apartment to be empty when I walked through the door after my own workday. Keys jingling in the lock, and the familiar scent of our space greeting me. But as soon as I stepped inside to close the door behind me, I heard him, or what sounded exactly like him, say, "Hey," bright and casual from the back bedroom down the hall, the voice ringing out clear as a bell. Now I was surprised, because he wasn't expected back for hours, so I called out a response and hurried towards the room to greet him, only to realize in the next heartbeat that there was no reply, no following footsteps, and when I reached the doorway, the back bedroom lay in pitch darkness with no lights on, or a TV flickering, or any sign of movement whatsoever. Confirming he truly wasn't home yet, and leaving me an immediate wave of unease that prickled my skin and quickened my pulse as I grabbed the dog's leash and bolted outside for a walk to shake off the chill that had nothing to do with temperature. Our dog, who's always been the most friendly and gentle creature imaginable, never barking indoors no matter the circumstance and only growling at real threats outside, started acting strangely too whenever I was home alone. He'd positioned himself in the living room door, letting out low, insistent growls or sharp barks directed at the empty space beyond. Behaviors I initially dismissed as him being extra protective of me in my solitude, but now suspect stem from his sensing the same unnatural presence that had been dogging my steps. The voices and sensations escalated from there into experiences that left no room for doubt or rationalization, such as the night when I was wide awake and just settling into bed about to close my eyes for sleep, my mind clear and body relaxed after a long day, only to hear an unfamiliar voice snarl aggressively right in my ear. "I hate it when you do that," with such venomous clarity and proximity that it felt like the speaker was hovering inches from my face, followed immediately by a crushing weight pressing across my chest, like massive hands or knees were pinning me to the mattress, rendering me barely able to move or draw breath, let alone scream for help despite my frantic internal struggles and racing thoughts that this couldn't be happening in our safe home. I lay there trapped for what felt like an eternity, but was probably nothing more than a minute or two until the pressure lifted as suddenly as it came, leaving me gasping and sweating, certain it wasn't sleep paralysis because I hadn't drifted off yet and had full awareness before and after. Just a few weeks ago, another jolt came while I was trying to wind down for the night in bed, feeling the first hints of drowsiness when an invisible touch began tickling lightly under my chin in a playful yet deeply sinister way that made my skin crawl with violation, causing me to leap out of bed petrified and wide-eyed, scanning the empty room for any sign of intrusion while my heart hammered so hard it hurt. While on a call with my mum one afternoon recounting these voices and odd happenings in detail to gauge her thoughts, she interrupted to mention that their Ring doorbell had chimed unexpectedly at the parents' house. When my dad reviewed the footage a moment later, he was shocked to see absolutely no one at the door, and no motion detected anywhere near the entrance all day, despite the camera's reliability, adding another layer of confirmation that whatever this is extends beyond my apartment. Now the activity has spread insidiously to my family, back at the parents' house where my brothers still live alongside my mum and dad, escalating sharply over the last few weeks into shared experiences that have everyone on edge and questioning their own senses in a home that used to feel safe. One brother distinctly heard our other little brother shouting angrily from down the hall, "You better not be doing what I think you're doing," with the exact same tone and phrasing he uses when annoyed, only for the younger one to confirm he'd been sound asleep the whole time and said nothing of the sort. My mum has heard our youngest call out for her in a pleading voice late at night from what sounded like right behind her in the kitchen, but she knew instinctively it wasn't him since he was tucked in bed asleep upstairs, so she refused to turn around or even acknowledge the sound, steeling herself against the fear that gripped her and now compelling her to avoid entering the living room alone after dark no matter what. Dad, always the ultimate skeptic who dismisses anything supernatural with a laugh, has now heard an unknown voice address him directly in the house. Unfamiliar words spoken clearly that he couldn't ignore or attribute to the TV or neighbors, shaking his certainty for the first time. The brothers have both glimpsed shadowy figures moving through the rooms, with one describing in shaking detail how he saw an old lady whom we suspect might have been my gran who passed away just before these events intensified, walk calmly into my parents' bedroom one evening and stand there staring at him intently without a word, her form fading as he blinked. He also witnessed the bedroom door close firmly on its own right after, and upon rushing in expected to find Mum shutting it, discovered the room utterly empty and dark once more, heightening his terror. Even my partner, much like Dad, initially a firm non-believer who'd roll his eyes at ghost stories, has started seeing strange things himself. Last night, he woke to find someone sitting motionless at the foot of his bed. We sleep in separate rooms because I rise brutally early for work. It was a tall figure with a distinct silhouette, where moonlight reflected off its head, giving an eerie sheen, mistaking it for me at first until unease set in, and he shone his torch directly on it, watching it vanish into thin air. The unease followed us even on a holiday a few weeks back, where from the moment we arrived at the rental, I felt an oppressive sense of being watched and unwelcome. A feeling that intensified when my partner later confessed he'd gotten up during the night to close one of the interior doors rattling in the breeze and caught a tall figure swiftly darting across the room from one side to the other in the dim light, striding in silence. He'd held back from telling me right away out of fear of amplifying my already frayed nerves, but admitted it next day when his own fright bubble burst. It reminded me inescapably of that line from Insidious. It's not the house that's haunted, it's you. Because while it all began with me noticing these intrusions first, now that I've started talking openly about them with my family and partner, the phenomena seems to be spreading contagiously to everyone around me, like some entity is feeding on acknowledgement or collecting fear. I've combed through explanations like mimics from folklore, entities that imitate voices and behaviors to lure or terror, but I'm no expert. To add context from my old workplace before all this ramped up, I was often the first to arrive and unlock the building before families and colleagues showed up, and on multiple occasions the motion sensor light, buried deep inside the structure far away from any entrance, would already be triggered and glowing, as if someone had been pacing the halls long before my key turned in the lock, despite the place being securely bolted shut each night, and the surrounding park monitored around the clock with no breaches recorded. I'd also hear 3 distinct knocks on my office door during quiet shifts, sharp and insistent enough to pull me from my paperwork, only to open it to an empty hallway each time. One colleague even paused mid-conversation with me once to point it out, stepping aside so I could answer in case it was a family needing a taxi home, confirming it wasn't just in my head. And now my partner wonders if the visitor at his bedside last night was his gran who passed away exactly 14 years ago to the day. He's piecing together vague facial impressions from the silhouette that match old photos, though we'll never know for certain. I'm not sure if I'm sharing this for specific advice on how to cope, or ward this off, or just to share it in hopes someone can relate and tell me what might be going on. Any insight would be appreciated, though this shows no signs of stopping. When I was about 4 years old, we used to live outside the town near a forest, with 2 houses maybe 200 meters apart from each other. We lived in the farther one into the forest next to a lake, that belonged to the other house. One time I was home alone with my sister. We were watching TV and I suddenly got thirsty, so I got up and went to our kitchen. Our house didn't have many doors. It was mostly open entrances, but the entrance to the kitchen had strings with balls attached to them hanging from the top of the doorframe. The hallway was kind of long, and as I entered the kitchen, I saw that the syrup bottle I would mix with water was too far away on the counter, and I couldn't reach it. I began yelling my sister's name, but no one was coming. I used to throw tantrums, so I started screaming, and a tear fell from my eye. And suddenly I got really quiet. The clock stopped ticking above the door, and the fridge stopped buzzing. It was as if I was suddenly deaf. Suddenly I heard a really loud stomp, like when you get mad and hit the floor with your foot. That scared me, and before I realized what it was, it started running really fast towards the entrance, and I jumped onto the table that was in the middle of the kitchen. I stopped breathing and looked into the door. 2 seconds later, a mutilated corpse of a person was pushed into the doorframe, and it was lying on the floor staring at me with its eyes pushed from its sockets. It kind of looked like snail eyes. I couldn't even scream because I was so scared of what was going to happen next, and the creature suddenly got dragged back behind the corner of the door. The way it got in and out so fast, the whole decoration on the door just shook like someone drove by in a car really fast. After that, the clock and the fridge started working again, and my sister walked into the door and laughed at me about why I was so pale and crying. I got down and never told her about it because I was so afraid. I told my friend in kindergarten about it the next week, but she made up her own story, so I didn't think much of it. After that, nothing really happened for about 2 years, but that's when we moved to the other house that my friend used to live in, and I moved into the town. She would sometimes visit me until she abandoned me completely, and that's when things got more hardcore. My room was basically the furthest room in the house from the entrance. One night I woke up to a weird clicking sound. I sat up and started looking around but couldn't find anything because it was so dark. But then I looked at the window. A dark figure was sitting outside my window where the flowers were, staring at me with its white pupils and mouth unhinged. I got really scared again, so I just hid under my cover. I heard it jump down on the ground, run around the house, the gate opened loudly, and our front door got opened. It was really quiet, and I was in shock, so I couldn't say a word. Suddenly, something pinned my palms into the mattress. My face was covered and pushed in, making me unable to breathe. This lasted about 3 seconds, and when it stopped, I immediately sat up and looked around my room. First, I looked at my sister, who made a very weird sound as I looked at her, and I looked on the floor, the ceiling, the window again, and found nothing. I thought, let me test this. I got under my blanket again, and the exact same thing happened. Something pinned my limbs except my legs onto the mattress, making me unable to breathe, and it lasted about 10 seconds. And the moment I thought I was going to die, it stopped, and I got up again. I looked at my sister, who made another weird sound as I looked at her, and I didn't think much of it. After that, I kind of just fell asleep, but in the morning when I woke up, I realized that I had a not very tall wardrobe right behind my head where I was sleeping, and I was kind of glad I never looked there. After this, maybe 1 year later, my old friend visited me with her mum, not knowing she didn't talk to me as much. We went to my room, sat on the floor and played with Lego. Suddenly, an empty plastic bag flew straight 90 degrees into the air above our head, and it got tossed right behind where she was sitting. We looked at each other, not making a comment about it, and she just continued talking like nothing had happened. Maybe a year later, my grandma visited to take care of me during the summer holidays. It was Sunday. I woke up and saw a giant piece of hair on my blanket in front of me, and I got up and ran to my grandma telling her about it. She went into my room, but the hair that I had seen had maybe gotten 3 times smaller, and she made a joke about it perhaps being a spider. About a month later into my holidays, My sister took me to Castle Buzov. I live in the Czech Republic, and when we got home, everyone was outside. I rushed up the stairs into our house, not knowing what was waiting for me in there. When I entered the house, I was still kinda walking really fast and didn't notice anything. But then I entered the living room where our TV was. We had a really long sofa in an L shape in one corner, and right next to it was a stone fireplace in the other. Next to the sofa in the L shape was a table, and next to the table was a big armchair. Something shifted behind the armchair by the sofa. Heart slamming, I peered closer. From behind the armrest rose a massive hairy arm thick as my thigh, covered in matted black fur that absorbed the light. Long, curved claws glinted in the light. Terror exploded in my chest. I spun and bolted for the stairs, heavy footfalls thundering behind me. I yanked open the door, hurled myself down 15 steps in one panicked leap, landing hard and slamming it shut. I pressed against the wood, breathing ragged. The thing scratched at the panels. Upstairs, my parents yelled, furious at the noise. They knew about my dark phobia, teased me endlessly, and what could I say? A monster chased me? They'd just laugh harder. So I never told anyone. 2 years dragged by. My sister moved out, hoping distance would end her own unease, as she had glimpsed the shadows too. But for me, it worsened. Lonely, I escaped daily to the nearby forest with my dog Luna. She'd been a freebie from the farmer selling us groceries, part shepherd and part something else, and she ignored commands, vanishing into the brush and leaving me yelling futilely. Still, the walks helped clear my head. One autumn afternoon, Luna stuck close. She froze, ears prickling, staring back into the trees. I shrugged, trudging on. Then she wheeled again, emitting a low, muffled growl like she feared alerting something, and chills prickled my skin. I glanced back, but there was nothing to see but swaying branches. But 3 seconds later, pivoting again, I caught a towering silhouette, ducking behind an oak, too bulky to be a man, movements fluid yet predatory. Luna went silent, pressing against my leg, pulse racing as I inched forwards. Twigs snapped nearby. Another look. The same hairy arm was draped over the trunk, claws tapping the bark rhythmically. It was identical to the one in the house. Panic surged. Nearby, a lumberjack felled trees for firewood, and I screamed for help. He burst from the undergrowth, axe in hand, asking what was wrong. "Did you see anything come this way?" I gasped, eyes locked on the tree. He'd approached from that direction. "Nah, just deer tracks, you okay?" I nodded mutely, not daring details, and we hurried home. I avoided the forest for a year. Paranoia, rooting deep. I'd whip around every few steps, convinced whatever it was still out there. Mum brought soothing story DVDs, calm voices to try and drone out the fear. Seeking safety, I switched rooms to one by the kitchen, which was closer to the family noise and felt less isolated, but it had a glass door to the hall, reflections warping the shadows. I only emerged if light shone, avoiding the dark walk to the switch. One evening, after singing karaoke to shake off nerves, I needed the toilet, so I peeked out the hallway, door ajar, and walked the 3 steps. It took 2 seconds to register. At the corner of the head, something slunk from hiding, inching into view. It was that arm again, extending slowly, claws scraping the wall. Stunned, I pivoted, sprinting back, slamming my door. My parents stirred. Then the handle rattled violently. It gripped, twisting hard. I seized it, muscles straining, yelling incoherently, and then the lights flicked on, and the rattling ceased. My mum burst in and scolded me, telling me I was hallucinating. We moved to a small town shortly after the hallway incident, right as I was starting 6th grade, hoping the change of scenery in the completely different house would offer the fresh start we all desperately needed after years of mounting unease in the old place. My new room was a cluttered space with my desk pushed right up against one wall where I could hunch over homework or play computer games, and a large window directly in front of it let in the pale morning light, but it turned into a black mirror at night. A glass door to my left opened into my parents' bedroom, with another regular door just 2 steps inside to the left, providing a secondary exit that I sometimes fantasized about using in a panic, and yet another door to my right, leading straight into the living room, where the family TV noises drifted through during the evenings. During those long gaming sessions where I'd lose myself in pixelated worlds, trying to escape the growing knot of fear in my gut, I began catching troubling peripheral glimpses of what seemed like a dark humanoid form lurking from just behind the glass door. Its outline fuzzy, but unmistakable in the corner of my eye. Yet every time I whipped my head around for a full look, it would vanish seamlessly into the adjoining bathroom, as if it knew exactly where I was about to check and had planned its retreat perfectly. Trips to that bathroom became ritualized ordeals of dread, where I'd dash inside as quickly as possible, fumble through whatever I needed to with my heart hammering in my ribs, then bolt back out and click the door shut softly behind me so as to not draw parental attention or worse, alert whatever was hiding there. About 5 months after settling into this new house, the encounters escalated in a way that shattered any illusion of safety I'd been clinging to, pulling me deeper into a nightmare that refused to stay confined to the past. It was about 2 a.m. when a persistent clicking sound at the glass door yanked me brutally awake from a shallow sleep. My body snapped upright as adrenaline flooded my veins before my eyes even adjusted to the dimness. There, pressed flat against the glass like it was trying to merge with the barrier between us, was a grotesque face, staring directly into my room, sunken eyes glowing faintly in the low light, with pupils dilated into endless black voids that locked onto mine with an intelligence that chilled me to my very core. Wide palms splayed out against the pane, with those same long, curved claws from before, now etching faint, deliberate scratches into the surface, as if marking its territory, or leaving a warning for me personally. A foul body odor seeped through the cracks around the doorframe. It was thick and cloying, like musky rot, and it made my stomach churn. And in that frozen moment, it reminded me horribly of those grim urban legends I'd overheard as kids, whispering about in the schoolyard. Stories of bloated corpses jammed into doorways or walls, discovered only after the smell gave them away. But this was no distant tale. This was real, and happening right there in my house, inches from my bed, with no explanation that my rational mind could grasp. I rolled towards the wall in a blind panic, squeezing my eyes shut so tightly that tears leaked out, willing it all to be a dream, while my breath came in shallow gasps. But then the door hissed open, with a scrape that echoed in the silence, followed by the carpet-muffled creaks of heavy footsteps advancing across the floorboards beneath, each one measured, as if whatever it was knew exactly where my bed sat, and it was savoring the approach. An icy breath ghosted across the back of my neck, raising every hair on my body and sending my hackles up like I was some prey animal sensing a predator in hot pursuit. While sweat poured down my face and back in rivers despite the freezing air, my legs going numb and cold as if frost were creeping up from my toes. Somehow, through the suffocating dread that pinned me in place, I forced myself to focus on breathing steadily until exhaustion dragged me into an uneasy sleep, my mind screaming at me to stay vigilant, but my body betraying me with fatigue. 3 hours later, I jolted awake, only to find a full-body paralysis had gripped me from toes all the way up to my neck, my limbs leaden and unresponsive no matter how hard I mentally strained against it, like some invisible force was holding me down in punishment for witnessing too much. The moon had dimmed behind thickening clouds by then, plunging the room into pitch darkness, where shapes dissolved into nothingness. But even in that void, I could sense a huge mass looming in the middle of the floor directly between me and the door. Its breathing coming in deep, ragged heaves that rattled like labored exhales from a massive chest, filling the air with a wet, guttural rhythm. Terror peaked in those endless minutes as wild thoughts raced through my head. Had it done something to me during the approach earlier, leaving me permanently damaged or disabled like some cautionary tale come to life? My body forever trapped, while my mind stayed alert to its whims. But eventually I drifted off again from sheer mental fatigue, only to wake once more at 7 a.m., still locked in that vise, the paralysis lingering for another grueling half an hour, before sensation trickled back into my limbs, leaving me shaken to my soul. Things quieted to a tense simmer as I pushed through high school, where flexible start times let me stay up late into the night, obsessively gaming to numb the constant undercurrent of fear that colored every shadow and sound. My dad's thunderous snores regularly rousing my mum from sleep, so I'd hear his bedroom door creak open, following by the familiar bump of his hip against my chair as he passed by to grab water or use the bathroom, a routine that usually reassured me it was just family. But there was one night at 3 a.m. where my headphones were on, but there was no game audio playing. The house was dead silent, amplifying every house creak and noise, when I heard what sounded like a door closing softly nearby, and I assumed it was Dad shuffling past again without his usual chair tap. Then it repeated, sharper this time, pulling my focus despite my immersion in the screen. By the third occurrence, I noticed the rhythm to it, a deliberate interval like someone mocking countdown. So I twisted halfway around in my chair to peer behind me, where 3 tall closets loomed, 2 directly behind my desk and 1 to the right next to the door, and caught the middle one standing slightly ajar with something invisible yanking it shut the instant my eyes focused. The motion too quick and forceful for wind or a loose latch, revealing itself only in that split-second tease. It was playing with me, taunting with my awareness, leaving me absolutely horrified and slumped to sleep in my gaming chair from sheer terror, rather than risk crossing the room to bed. This pattern entrenched itself over weeks, turning every late-night gaming session where I'd grow too scared to stand up and head to my room after midnight, preferring the chair's relative openness to the bed's vulnerability. Even school walks home with friends weren't safe from my creeping paranoia, as I'd compulsively glance over my shoulder on every block or so, my twitchy vigilance infecting their nerves until they tell me to stop, in exasperated tones. By senior year, when I was 18, a holiday gave me a rare, free night to stay up without school looming, and I finally dragged myself to bed at 2 a.m. Propped up, sitting with my body mostly covered by the blanket, I tucked firmly under my butt so I wasn't lying fully back in that exposed position, leaning slightly backward against the headboard for a sense of control over the oppressing darkness. Strange noises filtered from the living room next door, slow pacing at first, like someone restless and searching for a lost item. Heavy footsteps that thudded unevenly across the floorboards, then the unmistakable rustle of a plastic bag being tossed around and rifled through, as if hunting for food or valuables in the dead of night. I first thought it might be Dad who'd crashed on the couch that evening, but a quick ear strain confirmed his familiar snoring rumbles, steady from the master bedroom down the hall. So I stopped breathing entirely and focused every sense on tracking the intruder, footsteps growing more deliberate as they circled the room methodically, the bag crinkling louder now with frustrated yanks. I was on the verge of throwing off the blanket and investigating when a sudden thud echoed. The thing had tripped clumsily over something low, crashing into my bedroom door with a loud bang that vibrated through the wood and made my blood run cold. An unnatural silence fell, thick and watchful, before the sounds resumed faintly. More rustling, tentative steps, and then a minute later, another trip and bang against the door, harder this time, as it struggled to rise. Whatever it was leaned its full weight against the panels, creaking them inward slightly to signal a bulky form trying to stand, and that's when a clawed hand clamped onto the doorknob from the other side, twisting it with insistent force that made the whole frame rattle. I bellowed at the top of my lungs, screaming for my parents to wake up and help, my voice cracking with raw fear, until finally my mum stirred and took a sluggish 50 seconds to fully register the commotion and stumble out to check, her flashlight sweeping the living room where I insisted an intruder had been. But she found nothing. No bag disturbed or footprints, just an empty space. After that peak incident, I somehow scraped through the end of school. The overt manifestations quieted into a deceptive lull that made me believe it was over. The reprieve shattered with my first job, rotating through 3 shifts that often left me drained in the afternoons or dragged through nights home alone. And about a year into my grind, my sister dropped by for a visit with her kids and our parents. Everyone gathered, chatting casually in the backyard as I watched from my window, feeling a rare warmth of normalcy. Suddenly from inside the house came the sharp wrench of the door handle, followed by a forceful slam that banged against the couch tucked behind the corner, just out of direct sight. A sound so violent it jolted me upright, but then realization hit like ice water. Every family member was outside where I could see them clearly, and there was no one near the door at all. I turned slowly, dread pooling in my gut, and there was the tall dark silhouette, perched unnaturally atop the couch right behind where the door had swung open, standing poised and expectant, like it had been lying in wait, specifically for me to turn around and acknowledge it. Its form blending into the shadow, but radiating that same predatory patience I'd known for years. I cranked my music to maximum volume, blasting through the speakers to drown out any further noises and force my attention elsewhere, heart pounding, until everyone finally filed back inside and casually noted the still ajar door without a second thought. Even now when I'm left home alone for stretches, especially if Mum forgets to latch the living room door fully, I'll catch a pale head peeking from that same vantage point on the couch, eyes glinting. I know it's still here. That's where things stand currently in this endless vigil. My life is haunted by what I know is undeniably real, and I've had it since childhood. This is the first time I've ever committed to its words by sharing it here, hoping that maybe someone out there can relate to this shadow with claws that has shadowed my every move for years. So this was happening when I was really young, about 6 or 7. We lived in a really old, beat-down mobile home that my parents were renting, and it was incredibly spooky. A bunch of scary things happened that I remember, like heavy bootsteps running up the hall to my room, lights turning off and on, and weird voices at night, etc. I remember hating to use the bathroom at night because I was sure something was there waiting. One time, the dresser in my sister's bedroom was moved to the hallway inexplicably. My sister was like 9, so she couldn't have moved it herself, and she was crying when my parents found her. Anyway, the one thing I remember most vividly is the thing under my sister's bed. Sometimes I would play in her room with her dolls and my action figures as little brothers tend to do, and on a few of those occasions, I would end up dropping a toy that bounced under her bed, and almost immediately the toy would get flung back out. As a kid I wasn't very scared, but in my mind I imagined a hand-like thing from the Addams Family. It even got to the point where I would experiment with it. I would stand on her bed and throw something down intentionally, and pretty much every time, it would get thrown back out. I eventually got up the nerve and crawled under her bed but found nothing there. We moved out of that place when I was about 9, but the time I'd spend there is really clear in my mind. I often bring it up with my parents, but they don't like talking about it. Apparently they knew someone who was a medium who came by one day for a visit and unpromptedly told them that there was a man with no eyes sitting in a chair across the room. He told them that the spirit was good and wouldn't harm us. And I think that was the final straw, honestly, because they moved out shortly after. This is a collection of stories that all happened to me. Let me begin with the haunted cabin in the lake. A few years ago, my family and I went on vacation to the Lake District. It was myself, my little sister, my mum, my nan, and my granddad. We stayed in a privately owned single-story cabin right on the seaside, with the back of it facing miles of forest and hills. It was in the absolute middle of nowhere. We had no neighbours for miles, except at most a couple of retired pensioners sparsely dotted along the shoreline. It was definitely the most isolated we had ever been on holiday. It was a very old cabin, charming, but we got a very unsettling vibe right away. It felt like we were unwelcome. The wood was all splintered, dark and old. There were board games left for us, which we appreciated, but they were sticky with dust, like they hadn't been used for years. The rooms had odd angles and alcoves that suggested it was built a long time ago. The first night, my sister and I walked along the beach for hours, where we found a massive dead fish and a very expensive-looking house on a cliff, and some rock pools which we played around in. It was cold, but when we were away from the cabin, the sunset and the lights from the house across the other side of the bay made it feel very serene. However, as soon as we got back to the cabin, and I mean literally the gates opened up to the sand when you were back on the property, that uneasy vibe struck us right back. That night, we all heard several violent thuds across the roof and inside the property. My mum was so frightened that she later admitted she would have left on the first night, but felt silly and didn't want to waste money and end the holiday for everyone. We only stayed there for a few days. We kept hearing weird noises and feeling just very anxious and teary for no reason. However, we enjoyed the holiday until the last day. On the last night, we heard an absolutely almighty thud coming from within the house, in the direction of my grandparents' bedroom. I woke up with a start and bumped into my mum when I went to investigate. She had also just woken up and gone to investigate, looking to be on high alert. We went to check in our grandparents' bedroom, as we were worried that my nan had fallen out of bed. We slowly creaked our way to their room and gently opened the door. It's hard to describe the feeling of darkness and tense silence that we felt when we opened the room to find both of my grandparents unmoving and fast asleep. My mum and I were tearing up at this point and slowly backed away and closed their door halfway. My mum, who is, let's say, not very affectionate and rather dismissive, said that she, my sister and I were all going to sleep on a mattress in the kitchen tonight. I have never seen her so afraid, and she always told me that ghosts aren't real, but seemed to change her mind as we got older though. None of us slept very well, huddled up staring into the dark on a mattress, and when morning came, we packed up and left at lightning speed. We didn't tell my nan and granddad, so not to scare them, but I later learnt that my granddad was a believer as well. My mum and sister remember this holiday to this day, and we vowed never to return to that cabin and never to go on holiday in such an isolated place again. The second encounter I like to call Shadow Men at my dad's house, and this happened in the same house where I saw the little girl in the corner. For reference, I'll call it the Rose House. My dad's house was haunted as hell. I could see why. It had a very oppressive and traumatic past and present. I never really felt safe there, and the ghosts certainly didn't help. If they were there, they definitely were not friendly. Because when I was in that house, I always felt like I was in danger and made up imaginary friends to talk to make me feel better, especially when going up the stairs at night. Ever since I was a very young child who has never been exposed to gore before, I had horrific visions of my parents lying mutilated in their beds to the extent that the only thing I could recognize was 2 rib cages in the middle. I would have flashes of this particular demonic dog face whenever I tried to sleep facing away from the wall into the darkness. I slept under my covers for most of my childhood. Anyway, I already shared the story about the girl in the hospital gown. This is the story about the shadow people. This happened when I was a teenager. It was so hot that summer that I left my window open. I usually wouldn't, as I always felt this sense of dread when my window was open at night. I had a double bed next to the window, and I slept on the side next to the rest of the room, so there was space next to me on the bed. That night, I had my first episode of sleep paralysis. I woke up to see a solid shadow crouch next to me, in the space between myself and the window. It was squatting on the top of the pillow, with its arms across its knees. It was in the shape of a man, but elongated like it had been stretched. I had this overwhelming feeling that I was seeing something that I wasn't supposed to see. It didn't feel inherently malevolent, but it felt like it was a bad thing that I could see it. I was so determined not to look at it while paralyzed, I turned my head away to face my room, and I managed to fall back asleep as soon as I did turn my head. However, I woke up again in the night, turned back around, and it was still there. Obviously, in the morning, it was gone. I definitely could brush this off as sleep paralysis. However, a year or 2 ago, many years later, now that my little sister is a teenager, we were talking about this creepy feeling and remembering shared experiences which we had in the house. I had just shared an irrelevant experience which I'll share with you later, and she then shared her own experience. After I moved out, she moved into my room, with the same layout as I had it. Her bed, double, was next to the window. She also hated leaving her window open and had a feeling of dread when she looked outside at night. She said that she had a recurring dream of a tall, solid shadow man walking towards our house, which is directly at the end of a cul-de-sac. She said that each time she had the dream, it would walk a little closer, starting as just a figure at the entrance that she could barely see. As it got closer, she could see that it was walking backwards. Its feet were backwards, but its head was facing her, looking at her. She stopped opening the window entirely at that point. I suppose the dream stopped. When she told me this, I teared up and put my hand over my mouth. She laughed at me until I told her my story about the same shadow man in the same bed, in the same room, next to the window. Then, we were both in tears and shaking. We acknowledged this, and then swiftly decided to distract ourselves by binge-watching What We Do in the Shadows with the blinds pointedly closed behind us. I have read other stories about jinn, which say that they can be, but are not always inherently evil. They can be identified by their features facing backwards, especially in their feet. We do live in a country with a high concentration of Muslim communities, and have some Arabic family members. I do wonder if perhaps then, what we saw was a jinn, and if jinn and shadow people are related in lore. I'll keep an eye out in the comments, as I would love to hear from anyone who is knowledgeable in this matter. The next story I call The Handprints on the Window. This occurred in my dad's house, the Rose house, the same one with the shadow men and the little girl in the hospital gown. I would like to note that I feel the demonic little girl could have been mocking me, and that's why she felt so evil. Later on in life, I had an absolutely horrific medical episode that changed my life forever, and I was wearing the exact same hospital gown. Also to note, my mum later told me that she had seen a woman in an old-style brown coat pacing around the garden. Anyway, this one is about something that was actually on the outside of the house. Like with the little girl, it was a very ordinary non-spooky night. It was raining heavily. We were hanging out in the living room as a family doing our own thing. I walked into the kitchen to get a snack. In the kitchen, there is a large window facing the garden which completely covers the wall above the counter. It is too tall for me to reach, let alone a child. I turned on the light at the wall, turned around and stopped in my tracks. The entire window, and I mean every inch, was covered in tiny children's handprints. Thanks to the rain, they were very unclear and illuminated by the kitchen light. They were at all angles, including upside down from the very top. It shocked me, and I managed to call my dad and come and look. And the conversation went like this. "Dad? Silence. Nope. Then we turned off the light, left the room, and pretended that we didn't see that. As with another case of mine, I had actually taken a picture of the window, but got so freaked out by it being on my phone that I deleted it, which I regret. My next story is called Creepy Working Farm Holiday. This is another occasion when my family and I went to stay somewhere rural for a holiday. It was myself, my little sister, mum and dad. I was a teenager or young adult, female if that matters, and this time it was on a working farm in Wales. This meant that half of the house was rented out as a vacation home, and half was being lived in by an older couple of farmers, who worked the land while we were there. It was near a campground, and the campers would go and see if some of the animals were kept outside of the main farm. It was really cool to see and help out with the farm activities, especially as they had horses, which I love. We witnessed a camper feed a sausage roll to the pig, which was a bit disturbing, but the least worrying thing to happen on that holiday. I had a bit of an off vibe to begin with, but not enough to actually worry. I really liked the couple and spoke to them a lot. I work in the land-based and veterinary science industries, and they explained their operation and distinctly explained that they were a no-kill farm. They sent off their meat stock and corpses to other sites. Our part of the house itself was attached to their part via a locked door. Inside of our half, there was a strange room with a pitch-black high-up window and a lock, which we were told strictly to leave alone. We thought it was a bit weird, but whatever, it's not our house. One of the days towards the end of the holiday, I felt tired and wanted to stay home. My parents agreed, and they and my little sister went to drive off and find a beach. I had planned to sit in a tree in the forest and read a book. The forest was recommended to me by the couple, and they knew I'd be there. Although they'd be out, it was past a cow field, a sheep field, and right next to a small slate quarry. This was the complete opposite end of the campground and on their private land. However, when I got to the forest, I changed my mind. I noticed that the trees all had very low branches, and they were more coniferous than deciduous. There were very steep drop-offs and looked dangerous, and under the canopy it was almost pitch black in the middle of the day, and I felt my stomach drop, and something inside me told me under no circumstance should I step foot in that forest. I decided instead to take some pictures around the quarry. I started to get this feeling like I was being watched. I still wanted to enjoy the day, so I took a few pictures of some spiders and bushes that were nearby. I gradually noticed that all of the sounds, including the cars on the highway in the distance, had come to absolute silence. The only thing I could hear was another field of cows lowing. Their sounds started to unnerve me, and it sounded like something was wrong. As I explored the quarry, I found a very fresh, very bloody leg of a sheep, hoof and all. It was just laying in the middle of the dip in the quarry. I thought they were a no-kill farm. How weird. I didn't like how fresh and white it was, and how it had been roughly torn off the leg. It really did build up quite gradually, But I eventually felt this sick feeling, like something had me pinned down and was waiting for my next move. I felt like I had to act, like absolutely nothing was wrong, but I had to hurry up. I took a few more pictures and started to walk back up the shale path to the sheep field and did not look back. On the path back to the sheep field lay in a line of 3 small strange symbols made of bone, which looked to have about 3 bones each. They weren't there before, and I had just walked past it. Once I was past the symbols, I absolutely legged it, hopping the fence and sprinting past the staring eyes of the sheep. From then on, when the couple returned and my family returned around the same time, everything in the atmosphere had changed. I no longer felt warmth for the couple. I felt like they knew that I knew, and I had to pretend I knew nothing. I felt like they had their eye on me for too long, and they asked questions that seemed strange. I didn't tell my family this because I felt like I shouldn't say anything to tip them off. Their behavior of the animals also changed. The horses that I had loved interacting with just stared at me. I went to feed them treats by myself for the last few days, and their eyes had this glassy stare to them now. They didn't feel as friendly. I would feed them, and while I was watching them, they would play around and run. However, as soon as I turned my back and began walking back up the trail, they would stand still and just stare. It really freaked me out. I kept turning to look behind me, and after a few seconds they would resume playing. Then, when I looked away, they'd freeze again and watch me. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. And at the time, it felt like we were being allowed to leave. But only just. These are my stories. I'd love to get your thoughts, and look forward to reading your opinions. I'm writing from Nicaragua, and my family and I are experiencing something truly bizarre, and I am at a total loss for what to do next, and hoping someone here might have some insight on what to do. Let me explain. For over a month now, neem seeds have been falling in the exact same spot in our dining room every single night. The strange part? There are no trees anywhere nearby, not outside, not inside, nowhere. There's nothing that could be dropping seeds. Our house is completely sealed. We've inspected every inch for cracks, holes, pipes, or openings, but there is nothing. The seeds always fall at the same time, around 3 a.m. every night. To investigate, I set up an infrared camera, and the footage shows the seeds falling from above. But there is no visible source, no animals, people, or objects throwing them. They just fall. Adding to the weirdness, a few nights ago my mother had a nightmare that really shook her. In the dream, she saw a black creature on all fours approach her, grab her hand, and try to bite her. She woke up terrified. This dream happened after the seed phenomena had already started, and it has left us even more unsettled. Here's what we've ruled out so far. No animals like rats, bats, or birds, as there's no access point. No attics, drop ceilings, or hollow walls where seeds could be accumulating. There are no tremors, vibrations, or machines dislodging anything. The seeds don't appear anywhere else in the house, only that one specific spot. And we've ruled out a prank or human interference. We've tried to debunk it logically, but nothing explains it. Has anyone ever heard of something like this? Seeds or natural objects appearing indoors without explanation? Could it be some kind of paranormal manifestation or spiritual message? If so, how do we approach it? Are there any methods to investigate further? We are genuinely disturbed and want answers. I'm open to both rational and respectfully spiritual explanations. If anyone wants to help analyze, I'd appreciate your guidance. This had to have been when I was around the age of 9 or 10. My family used to live in a 2-story house with a living room facing the stairs. My sister of 12 and I were camping in the living room and sleeping in a tent we had set up just for fun. At some point, I'm not sure if I had woken up or had barely been falling asleep, I noticed a wizard-like figure going down the stairs. I remember initially being confused, but I don't recall being scared, when I normally am terrified of any unexpected noise. I say it was Dumbledore because it clearly resembled a wizard with a pointy hat and long beard, but it appeared to be floating on the stairs. Creepy, right? I'm not sure when my sister and I first talked about that night we camped together, but I recall talking to her about that night a few years ago. She mentioned how she saw a strange figure going up the stairs too. The exact same thing, a wizard-like person with a beard, floating on the stairs. Who knows at this point? I'm thinking maybe we discussed that night when we woke up the next day, and she could have told me what she saw and I just eventually created that as a personal memory from myself. You know how kids do that and think it's their own memory? Or maybe we did both see the same thing that night. And if we did, what was it? Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. Would you believe that 8 years ago today, my daughter was born? I actually can't believe so much time has passed since then. It has gone by alarmingly quick. Anyway, I appreciate you all. Thank you all so much for being here. I'd like to give a special thanks, of course, to my members and patrons, whose names can be seen on screen. You do get some cool perks for signing up, exclusive content and the like, and if you would like some of that, feel free to check the link down below. But that's it from me, guys. Stay awesome. I might throw together a cheeky comp and release it tomorrow, maybe? But we'll have to wait and see, because tomorrow is Pandora's birthday party day, so yeah, gonna be busy, but hopefully. We'll see how you guys feel about this video to make that decision. But if not, I'll see you again soon. Good night.